Hi, this is Anna Hackman from Green Sisterhood, and I'm here with my co-host Karen Lee. Wave Karen.
Hi, everybody.
And Lindsay Dahl, our guest for today, who's Safer Chemicals Coalition. And we're going to be talking about federal toxic law legislation. And this is really an important topic. And we wanted to bring Lindsay on because she's at the forefront of what's going on. Because many of you, walk into a store and you see things like toluene, formaldehyde, things, chemicals that none of us want in our bodies or in any of our products. And Lindsay is working towards making our products more safe. So Lindsay, I'm going to bring you right on and talk about what actually is Safer Chemical Coalition and who's behind all this, and give us a little rundown.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thanks for having me here. Safer Chemicals, Healthy Families, as you mentioned, is a coalition. We've got over 450 organizations and businesses that are part of our coalition. And so we're really uniting and pulling together folks that are from the environmental community, from the public health community, from disease communities, like people that are really focused on cancer prevention. And we're united around the goal of trying to protect the American public from toxic chemicals. We've got millions of members collectively, and we also have a wonderful and fantastic network of over 50 bloggers who regularly contribute and help with building this movement.
So let's talk a little bit about the beginning, the 1975 legislation, TASA, because a lot of people don't really know anything about why this law is so important, the new legislation coming up. So let's backtrack, what is that, 30 years?
Yeah.
Disco?
Yeah, so we'll talk about 1976, but I'm actually going to bring us back to after World War II in the 1950s, just as a little bit of context for everyone. So after World War II, the United States started making all these amazing products that really made the day-to-day lives of American families a lot easier. A lot of that was a result of some of the innovations that had taken place during the war. But it wasn't until the 1960s that a lot of scientists had raised some red flags around the chemicals that we were using, both as pesticides, but as well as the chemicals in our products. So if you remember in the 1960s, Rachel Carson, a scientist and biologist, wrote Silent Spring, which talked about toxic chemicals specifically as pesticides. And she said, you know what, maybe we should slow down, test these chemicals a little bit more, and learn a little bit more about them, because early warning signs say that they're probably not the best for health and the environment. So as a result, if you remember from your middle school civics class, the 1970s were a great time for environmental laws to be passed. And in 1976, Congress passed the Toxic Substances Control Act. It's called TSCA for short. And in 1976, it was a law that was passed that was intended to say we should make sure that chemicals that go into our products or in our workplaces are safe before they get onto the market. But the law is fundamentally flawed. So a couple ways that the law that we have today is flawed is that most people think it's 2013, that when you go into the store, the majority of the chemicals used in the consumer products have been tested for health or safety. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So under this really broken law, we have very minimal access to basic health and safety information on toxic chemicals. And in fact, the EPA spent over 10 years trying to regulate asbestos. We know asbestos is, one of the most harmful materials out there, and they couldn't even regulate and ban asbestos under this federal law. So the question remains, if you can't regulate asbestos, what can you actually regulate under TSCA?
Well, hold on one second. I was trying to mute myself because I was trying to do something. Lindsay, let's talk about what does that means? Like, since that time, how many chemicals have actually have been rubber stamped through, and what that means, rubber stamp?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when the law was originally passed in 1976, it grandfathered in 62,000 chemicals used on the market. So it basically gave all of these chemicals, some of which we know are harmful, a free pass. Ideally, the law was supposed to regulate new chemicals that entered onto the market, but the law is so toothless that the result is there's somewhere over 80,000 chemicals that are registered for use in the United States. We don't know if all of those chemicals are actually being used to make products or in industrial applications, but there's over 80,000 chemicals registered for use on the market, most of which we know very little about.
And so what does that mean? I mean, why has it taken till now for us to be looking at this act and saying, well, this isn't right?
I think there's no easy answer to that question, but I think there's a couple of reasons. The first of which is that when the suite of the 1970s environmental laws was passed, both Congress and the public had thought, oh, check, okay, we can put a mental check. We had taken care of clean air. We've taken care of clean water. We've taken care of toxic chemicals. And the result is that a lot of the American public thought that since this law was passed, chemicals were going to be regulated for their safety. I think a lot of people didn't really know some of the loopholes that were in the law, and the result is that it's been 37 years later, and the American public is really, really starting to wake up now to just how pervasive of a problem this is. So I think the reason no one's really paid attention to this is both because people thought it was being taken care of, and then you've seen in the last 10 years, a lot of our coalition partners and different bloggers have really raised the profile of this issue. So now it's no longer kind of a niche issue. It's becoming one that American families across the country are talking about.
Let's give a little context to the act that was being proposed, the legislation that was being proposed maybe in the last 4 years, the Safer Chemicals Act. Tell us a little bit about that, because that was an attempt to start getting this to the forefront.
Yeah, so Safer Chemicals, Healthy Families, we started officially as a coalition 4 years ago, and we've been actively working with all of our partners on reforming TSCA here in Congress. And so the Safe Chemicals Act has been the primary vehicle in the Senate to do that. And there's been some momentum on the bill. Last summer, Senator Lautenberg, who is the chief champion of the bill, brought the bill through its first vote in over 36 years, and it passed the Environment and Public Works Committee, which is really exciting. He then reintroduced into this new 2013 Congress. But then most recently, he introduced a new version of the bill, a bipartisan version of the bill, with Senator Vitter from Louisiana, just a couple months ago and right before the senator passed away, as kind of a compromise version of what reforming our federal laws could look like.
And the name of that bill is?
The Chemical Safety Improvement Act.
And what kind of compromises are we talking about? Are these compromises that are going to be hard to live with, or they're compromising as to having a first step? What do you think?
I think some of the compromises as drafted are painful, but that doesn't mean that there's not an opportunity to strengthen the bill while still maintaining that bipartisan momentum. So what I mean by that is that some of the compromises in the bill, for example, a lot of the specifics of the Safe Chemicals Act that we really thought were productive for protecting public health, like defining what a vulnerable population is, pregnant women, communities that are living next to manufacturing facilities, children and infants, those are all clearly identified as vulnerable populations. That's not in this new version of the bill, and we like to see some more of the specifics like that more clearly defined. The other thing that's one of the most contentious pieces is that some of the ability for states to pass their own laws, so a lot of states across the country have been passing individual laws on toxic chemicals. Some of that authority has been taken away from them in this new compromise bill. And I think there's also an opportunity there to fix the Chemical Safety Improvement Act in a way that hopefully everyone can get on board.
So when you talk about the compromises for young children and pregnant women and people living by manufacturers, does that mean that they didn't specify a higher level of hazardous chemical level? Like what does that mean that they didn't define that?
Well, there's a couple things. A basic kind of boring nerdy thing is that what the definitions of certain terms are in legislative language in a bill are actually really important, because that defines throughout the bill how the real concrete ways the EPA can actually regulate chemicals. So in the definition section, that's part of what I'm talking about for vulnerable populations. But one other thing that's really concrete is that the Safe Chemicals Act had a provision that we liked that specifically allowed the EPA to take action on what is called hotspot communities. So our coalition has environmental justice organizations from across the country that are working at the fence line every single day to address toxic chemicals in their community. And the hotspots provision would have allowed the EPA to be able to take action to help reduce some of those toxic chemical exposures from air, water, and other sources. So that's a glaring omission in the new Chemical Safety Improvement Act.
And what does it do now? If they don't have a hotspot, what do they have?
That provision was just taken out of the bill. The bill still has a robust framework for reforming TSCA, or maybe robust is too strong of the word, depending on how you look at it. But it still has a framework for reforming TSCA, but specifically that hotspots provision has been taken out.
So does that mean you have to go through like an administrative procedure to get the EPA to do what they got to do, and that's a time lag? Is that why, what do they have now? What kind of remedy does these hotspot areas have? None?
The only similar kind of protection they have, which is very limited, is under the Superfund program. So Superfund is a great program that also Senator Lautenberg helped champion, but it is, grossly underfunded, like a lot of the EPA programs. And so I think there's several ways in which, both on the vulnerable populations piece, but also on some of the other provisions we're trying to advocate for to strengthen the bill, it seems like there's a path forward to make some of those things happen.
So give us like a layman's terms of, I'm a chemical company, I introduce a chemical, where does it go under this act? Does it get reviewed a precautionary principle? Give me, like, let's say I'm the chemical company with a chemical and I bring it in a box.
Yeah.
What happens with this act?
Well, I'll give you kind of the 30,000-foot view, because the bill, as you imagine, it's over 100 pages and it's pretty complex. But I'll give you kind of a crude version of what the bill would do. Basically, the bill would create a structure for chemical manufacturers, like yourself in this case, to be able to bring a chemical to the Environmental Protection Agency for review. And the EPA would use some criteria that they develop to help determine whether or not the chemical is safe. And as the bill is drafted, there's two different kind of buckets, so to speak, that a chemical could go into, either a low priority chemical or it could become a high priority chemical. And at that point, there's lots of other ways that states can petition the EPA and things like that. But then if a chemical is classified as high priority, in theory, it could go to certain types of regulation on that chemical. There's lots of really boring details, but they're boring details that are really important in between the step of when a chemical is deemed high priority and before it becomes regulated. But those are some of the details we're working to strengthen to make sure that we learn some of the lessons from the 1976 law.
Right. See, that's what worries me. Being a lawyer, I definitely see these gray areas.
Yeah.
It worries me because what's deemed a high profile versus a low profile when it's a chemical that no one may never even thought of today, like 5 years from now. Like, where does it fit and who decides? And will the government have enough funding to handle all these chemicals?
Yeah. The funding thing is a really big issue, and it's something I think everybody's concerned about, because when a bill is passed, hopefully, something that everyone feels comfortable with, we have to make sure that the EPA actually has resources to implement this program. But yeah, I think what you raise is a lot of the fine details in the bill is some of the stuff that we're hoping that we can, hopefully it can be strengthened.
And what's your thoughts about that actually happening with it being bipartisan? Do you think that a bipartisan bill is going to be more vague, or are they going to all kind of want to lawyer it out, as I call it, to make it's very clear and concrete?
I think that's the million-dollar question right now. The difference between the specifics in a bill versus something that's a little bit more stripped down, that's exactly the kind of balance that I think our friends in Congress are trying to figure out. So I'm not sure all the details on that kind of stuff, since most of my work is really focusing on getting the public involved and weighing in the debate. But I think the next couple months we'll really be able to see where some of that movement, where that room is.
I see that Karen has a question. Karen, go ahead.
Some of the questions that I hear from my readers is how come we are allowed to use these chemicals when, I don't know if it's EPA or, the government, knows that they're harmful. So like how does one know when they don't know that it's harmful?
Right.
And then 10 years from now, when we thought it was okay now, 10 years from now they say, oh, it's not okay. So who do we trust, and how do you, as a consumer, even without these chemical acts and government intervention, what's your advice on avoiding some of these potentially harmful chemicals?
Well, the truth of it is, it's really hard because right now consumers are totally left in the dark.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's the way our federal laws are structured is it basically creates a veil of secrecy between consumers and the chemical industry. And I would say there's a few things that we can do. The first of which is that even though the EPA doesn't have the ability to regulate a lot of toxic chemicals under our current laws, there's a ton of peer-reviewed science over the last several decades that shows certain chemicals that we know are in consumer products linked to health effects. And so while I can never claim anyone's cancer is linked to formaldehyde exposure earlier in life, we can know that formaldehyde causes cancer, and having it in our children's shampoo or in building materials probably isn't a good thing. And so what we're trying to do is to use a lot of that peer-reviewed science and a lot of the product testing information that's been coming out from both groups like ours and our partners and some peer-reviewed scientists to say, here's ways that consumers can start to avoid toxic chemicals. And I would just say a lot of our bloggers within our blogger network, which you can see on our website, have really amazing tips that make it easy for people to take some steps personally while also advocating for Congress to change the system.
I know it sounds like a backward system where you find out that it's harmful and then you try to educate the consumers. It's kind of like it. It takes such a long time, and I'm a chiropractor, so like I've been in this healthcare field for a long time, so I know that when you have symptoms, it's already too late. You've been exposed to whether it's environmental or physical stresses to your body, and then by the time you feel the pain, chances are you've already damaged some systems in your body. So how do we? Do we just avoid any chemicals that we can't pronounce? The proverbial method. If you can't pronounce it, don't use it. Or do we have to be the scientists and read these peer review journals that are very technical? So is there a page on your website, let's say, something that's been banned, or something they are studying because they might be potentially dangerous, or something that have been deemed safe that people can go and take a look? Do you have information on your website other than the bloggers, great bloggers that you have?
Yeah.
Does your website have information like that where people can go to?
Yeah, we have a lot of information on our website. If you go to saferchemicals.org, there's a bunch of information on both the science, but on real concrete applicable tips for consumers. So I actually just recently pulled together a guide for new parents, because I know when people are expecting, or if they have a new baby on the way, they're really having to buy a lot of products. And so I helped give some people some concrete tips to be able to make some good choices for their family. But I think you're right. I think that the system as it stands is really backwards. We're widely exposing people to all sorts of different toxic chemicals with a little understanding as to what those effects are. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to change that system to say, if we know certain chemicals cause cancer or they harm the developing brain, they probably shouldn't be in the products we're exposed to every single day or in the communities and places we live. And so we're trying to reverse that antiquated thought to do something that's a little bit more proactive and also preserves the ability for companies to make safer products, because as we all know, there's a lot of consumer product companies out there right now that are doing the right thing. So It's not like this is some crazy, futuristic thing we're talking about. We know it's possible to make products that are safe without toxic chemicals.
So this bill, this act that we should all be aware of, is that going to change the way we buy things?
I think it'll make, I think it will, in the sense that it'll be hopefully less of a headache when you go to buy things.
That's good.
I would say the one important distinction is that this bill is really looking to reform the way chemicals are used before they get out into the supply chain. So both in manufacturing, in the places we work, in the communities we live. So it's not directly regulating product manufacturer companies, people that make real products. Instead, it's looking at very upstream, the most upstream you can possibly get, to say, before we start using these chemicals widely in the commercial world, let's test them for safety. So I think when the consumers go to the store, it hopefully will be a relief and a burden once we have a functioning system, so you can have some peace of mind to know that there's a system that's protecting you.
One thing when you talk about upstream versus downstream, what about the chemicals that are already in play, like BPA? Because that's been going around and around and around, and EPA says it's fine. We don't think it's fine. What about those chemicals?
And now BPS, which is supposed to be BPA free, but then we don't know much about BPS. So,
right. So what about all those chemicals that are out there? What happens?
Yeah. Well, I'll just say that I think under a functioning TSCA system, we would get away from this, the bad actor sister coming, like BPA and BPS, the nasty cousin that comes after we start to focus on one chemical. I like that nasty cousin. Yeah. Like, who are you? But I think Anna, you raised a really good question. A lot of the products that are already on the shelves contain different toxic chemicals, and eventually they're either going to be reused, recycled, or they're going to end up in landfills. There's a lot of different problems that are associated with that, which for me really underscores the urgency for us to get a handle on this issue, because we know that landfills leach. We know that chemicals like bisphenol A are leaching from the landfills and entering the drinking water in Minnesota, for example. So this is something that's, the issue is far more than just what kind of products am I going to buy and how does this affect me when I'm cleaning my home. You have to look at the whole life cycle of a chemical that's used in a product, and that's how a lot of these exposures really accumulate in some of these low-income communities and communities of color that I mentioned before.
So will that in the act, does it talk about reviewing chemicals that are already in existence?
Yeah, it does. So one thing that's exciting is that we've got a really big hole that I mentioned that we have to dig ourselves out of, over 85,000 chemicals registered for use. The bill would actually get a sense of how many chemicals are actually being used right now, which no one has a real clear sense of, but then eventually would put those chemicals through a safety review. And that will take some time because we have a big hole to dig ourselves out of. But eventually, hopefully under this reform TSCA, we'd be able to get through all those chemicals to have information on old chemicals and on new chemicals.
Have they thought of using the European standards as a way to dig out first? Because the EU already has, bills in place, so does Canada, of what they've a lot of their chemicals that we have here, they won't use over there. So would they think of using that as like a preliminary way of digging out, or they just want to go and do testing?
Yeah, no, I think both the European and Canadian laws are something that folks on the Hill are really looking at to see where we can use some of the information that's already on the market under those laws. I know both the European REACH program and the Canadian system, as well as both TSCA reform measures that are in the U.S. Congress, are all very different. And so it's not like just kind of implementing something that is happening overseas in the United States. The programs are different, but I definitely think everyone's aware of the fact that there's overlap, and there is probably a way for us to streamline that so we're not reinventing the wheel every single time.
And before we go to the questions, I wanted you to talk a little bit about your Mind the Store campaign. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's really fun. So in addition to urging Congress to move on the issue of toxic chemicals, we're also working with the nation's top 10 retailers. Since a lot of our experience is going into retailers and having those moments of frustration of like, oh man, I don't even know what to buy here. We feel like the retailers have a really important role and responsibility to play to help move the market away from toxic chemicals. So we're asking to work with them on the hazardous 100 chemicals, which are chemicals that have been pulled together from authoritative sources from across the country and world to say, we know that these chemicals are harmful. And then hopefully work with the retailers to create a plan to move away from those. So we've got some initial interest from retailers and a lot of interest from the public.
Yeah, I was part, as you know, I was part of that campaign for green building, and I have to tell you, building products are one of the most frustrating areas for me.
Yeah,
because there's so many chemicals and the composition of them and stuff, but that has been a really fun campaign to work on. Karen, is there any questions over on Green Sisterhood right now?
You're putting me on the spot now. Thank you.
Well, if anybody can do it, you can, Karen, because I would click us out of Google Hangout and that'd be it. I'm the technical spaz here, for Green Sisterhood.
It wouldn't have been the first time.
No.
Actually, before we go to Green Sisterhood, I have a question about the EPA role. I know EPA. I think of EPA as like our guardian angel who's going to really help us to avoid a lot of these chemicals in our daily lives. What is? It's something because I know Gina McCarthy's. Confirmation is being talked about as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
What is the sense that sense out in the streets or in the halls down in DC? How much power does EPA really have? Are they able to really protect us with these chemicals that are already in existence or preventing chemicals from being released?
It's a good question.
Yeah, I think it depends on the EPA's power has direct link as to how much authority they have under the laws that we pass. So for the issue of chemicals,
now, do they have any? I'm sorry for interrupting. Do they have any power in making suggestions or amending or anything to do with this law being passed?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Typically, the Environmental Protection Agency doesn't weigh in on the congressional issues. So I'm not super up to speed on how all of that works, but I know that it's not like
they can't testify and say, look, this is what happened and this is how many people.
They can testify. They can testify. I'm just talking about the kind of nitty gritty of connecting with people, but definitely, every hearing that you have on the Hill, the EPA is usually there talking about how the existing program is not working. So they've definitely been really outspoken on that. But as far as the kind of details of what language is where, that's really something that Congress.
Right. I assume that they're not going to be involved in the actual, wording or the workings of the law. But I'm just wondering if as a layperson, if EPA says this is dangerous, whether it's burned or end up in landfill, or even if some of these chemicals when they get recycled, it comes back in another form, so it never goes away. So like BPA is one example. You recycle cash register receipts or recycled paper,
right?
And it ends up there. So then you're getting it back into your
toilet paper.
Yeah, I blogged about toilet paper, cash register, the pizza boxes, all kinds of recycled paper that you end up getting the BPA back. So like if EPA says, okay, this is bad news, you should do this, you should do X, Y, Z. Do lawmakers say, okay, EPA says it's bad, so it must be bad, so let's think about this? Do they have that kind of power? I'm hoping that they do, but no.
I think it depends. I mean, everything, especially around these chemicals, is so politicized once it goes into Congress. So EPA can, say things about the safety of different chemicals, and they have, and as have other different agencies. But as far as Congress responding to that to actually take action, it just quickly becomes a political food fight, unfortunately. But that's part of the reason that it's exciting that Senator Lautenberg and Senator Vitter were able to make this bipartisan compromise, just because it's really unprecedented in this day and age. And while, like I said, the bill as drafted isn't sufficient in our point of view, part of my job is, someone that the reason I can do this job is because I'm positive, and I feel positive about the world in which we live.
It takes a special person.
Is the reason that I think that there's hopefully a path forward to make sure that we can get what we want and also maintain the bipartisanship, because I think that's something that's really special and should
should be done that way. I mean, it affects everybody. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on.
Yeah. The one thing I'll just say to that is that one of the best things about working on this issue for me has been I travel all across the country. I work with people from all different backgrounds. And, when you talk to people on the street about this, it really does not matter if they're Democrat, if they're Republican, if they hate politics, whatever. They care about this issue. And that's part of the reason that I feel like there's a good opportunity for us to make some changes, the broad public bipartisan support.
I don't think cancer, cancer is prejudiced. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't have affiliation.
They're not biased.
You're not Democrat cancer, Republican cancer.
It makes no difference.
Lindsay, one question for you is what can we, the public, do to help you and help all these organizations that are striving so hard to make this bill possible?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a lot everyone can do. The first thing I would encourage folks to do is to go to our website at saferchemicals.org, and under Take Action, you can send a letter to your members of Congress to encourage them to strengthen the bill. And that's something that's really meaningful. It makes a difference. And I would definitely email it to your friends, encourage them to sign that as well. The other thing is that we're really working, the committee that has jurisdiction over this bill has, both Democrat and Republican senators are really important at this key point in time. So we're encouraging folks to contact, especially those that live in those key states that the Environment and Public Works Committee members are on, to get in contact with your members there. And then the other thing that I'll mention that folks don't always do, but I think is really, really valuable is if you have a little bit of time, maybe 15 minutes or so, to write a letter to your local newspaper, a letter to the editor. It's only about 150 words long. It doesn't take too much time, but those have a really big impact, because then you can share your concerns about this issue with your community and your members of Congress that are hopefully going to be reading that newspaper too.
Karen, any last questions?
Not a question, but a comment about writing to your local senators, because when you do, they do write back. Mm-hmm. And I think some offices you can actually call them too. So mm-hmm. I haven't had a chance to actually talk to somebody, but I've gotten a recorded message. But mm-hmm. When you do that, it makes a difference. You feel like you are doing something. So we're going to leave the links under our YouTube video, so that people who are watching can go, and also on our website, so that they can click and get to your site for more information. So that's great tip. Thank you.
So everybody, thank you so much for watching today with Lindsay, and we hope that you take action like Lindsay suggested. Next week is Penelope of Toxic Baby. We're going to be talking about her new app and how it actually flows right into
chemicals.
Lindsay. Yes, right. It actually flows right in, which is, we like to take credit for that actually happening, that we made it happen that way, I'll give it to Karen. Karen made that happen. So we hope to see you next week, 2 o'clock East Coast time. If not, you can always watch our videos on Green Sisterhood. They're always embedded from YouTube or on our YouTube channel under Green Sisterhood. And thank you so much for watching. And if you have any questions that you didn't get to ask Lindsay, go ahead and do them in the comments. We're going to do a little article that'll be up in a couple days with a video, and you can ask questions there. And if there's anything that Lindsay can answer, she'll answer it in those comments. Lindsay, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for giving us the lowdown on the new legislation.
Yeah, thank you. It's fun.
Making it easier, for us to understand. Because anytime you talk about bills or some kind of act, we're like, something to do with law. It must be complicated. But thank you so much for making it easier for us to understand. Thank you.
Yeah.
Everybody, goodbye. Have a great day and stay cool.
Bye-bye.
Bye.